Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. Medieval Village. In the autumn of 1957, 3 young cadets found themselves unexpectedly transported to a different era as they approached the village of Kersey in Suffolk, UK. Subtle hints of their impending ordeal would emerge when William Lang, a keen observer of his surroundings, noticed that the trees and grass had transformed into vibrant colours of spring. As the 3 drew closer to the village, the imposing church tower atop the hill came into view, its bells ringing out across the countryside. However, about 100 yards from the church, an eerie silence descended upon them. The bells abruptly ceased, and not a single bird call or gust of wind could be felt or heard. The houses before them appeared ancient, with no signs of modern life, no television aerials, telegraph wires, or street lamps in sight. Upon reaching the stream, the cadets encountered white ducks, but these creatures seemed unnaturally still and lifeless, almost like decoys. Peering through the tiny windows of the cottages, they saw no evidence of human presence, except for what appeared to be a butcher's shop. Inside, 3 ox carcasses hung, green with age and shrouded in cobwebs. As the young men sat by the bridge over the stream, their initial sense of an eerie sadness began to shift into something more sinister, a feeling of being surrounded by hostile, unseen watchers. After enduring this unnerving sensation for around 25 minutes, the cadets decided to flee the ghostly village. As they ran, the sound of church bells suddenly returned, and smoke could be seen rising from chimneys that had previously been dormant. This sudden change suggested that the cadets had indeed slipped back in time, possibly even further than the 12th century when the church was first constructed, as modern images of the church indicate that it could not have simply vanished from sight. Lane's companions on that fateful day were James MacLeod and Robert Ferguson. The 3 young men had met during their military training and had quickly formed a close bond, often exploring the countryside together during their free time. The village of Kersey, located in the heart of Suffolk, has a rich history dating back to the Anglo-Saxon period, and picturesque cottages and winding streets have remained largely unchanged for centuries. As the cadets made their way back to their barracks, they struggled to come to terms with what they had just experienced. Had they really been transported back in time, or was it merely a shared hallucination? The vivid details of their experience, including the changes in the colours of the trees and grass, the eerie silence, the disappearance of the church, and the ancient appearance of the village, seemed far too real to be dismissed as a mere trick of the mind. Wuthering Heights. In the summer of 1959, British actor Alec Helm found himself immersed in a bizarre and inexplicable experience while working at a theatre in Bradford, not far from the renowned Bronte village of Haworth. Born on April 30th, 1938, in London, Helm had always been drawn to the mysterious allure of the moors that had inspired Emily Bronte's timeless novel, Wuthering Heights. Before each performance, Helm would embark on a solitary walk across the moors, a ritual he had performed countless times over the past 4 years. On one particularly fine day, he set out as usual, his footsteps carrying him towards the desolate ruined farmhouses known as Top Withins. As he approached his destination around lunchtime, Helm caught sight of a curious figure, a man donning a deerstalker hat and carrying a shotgun. Intrigued by the stranger's sudden disappearance, Helm continued on his way, hoping to catch a glimpse of the elusive figure. However, as he made his way towards the crumbling remains of Top Withins, an astonishing sight unfolded before his eyes. Helm instead found himself gazing down at a magnificent Georgian farmhouse, its structure perfectly intact and exuding an air of vitality. Compelled by an indescribable force, Helm quickened down the slope, his heart pounding with anticipation. As he reached the farmhouse door, he knocked firmly, his curiosity piqued by the tantalizing aroma of a freshly prepared meal wafting from within. Peering through the windows, Helm could see a table set for lunch, the scene inside the house a stark contrast to the barren landscape surrounding it. The sounds of livestock filled the air, the grunting of pigs and the lowing of cattle adding to the authentic atmosphere of an apparent working farm. Helm, eager to explore further, made his way to the barn, expecting to find the source of the animal noises. To his astonishment, the barn stood empty, devoid of any signs of life. Perplexed and somewhat unnerved, Helm turned his attention back to Top Within's, seeking the reassurance of a familiar ruin. However, to his utter disbelief, the ruin had vanished, as if it had never existed. It was at this time that the deerstalker-clad man made a brief reappearance, his presence only magnifying the eerie and unsettling mood of the scene unfolding around him. Thoroughly spooked and desperate for a sense of normalcy, Helm began his frantic retreat back to Hayworth, his mind reeling from his impossible yet seemingly apparent historical homage. As he hurried along the moors, he glanced at his watch. To his surprise, the watch had stopped at precisely 1:45 p.m, despite having been fully wound and functioning correctly earlier that day. Hours later, just before the curtain was set to rise on his evening performance, Helm checked his watch once more. Astonishingly, it displayed the correct time, 5:45, even though he had not rewound it since his unsettling encounter on the moors. If you've never visited Top Within's, it's definitely worth checking out, either virtually or in person. The ruin is impressively isolated and is the only standing structure for kilometres. Prehistoric dreamscape. In the early 1920s in the sleepy town of Flackton, Arkansas, a young boy named Robbie and his friend Ann set out on a Sunday afternoon. The streets were eerily silent, as most of the townspeople had gathered to watch the much-anticipated baseball game. Robbie and Ann decided to take a shortcut through the pine woods to reach the baseball field. As they made their way through the familiar terrain, Robbie and Ann suddenly came across a stream they'd never encountered before. Puzzled but undeterred, the two friends crossed the stream hand in hand, only to find themselves in a completely unfamiliar landscape. The scrubby undergrowth, knobbly pine trees, pungent dog fennel, and gypsum weed had vanished, replaced by a strange and silent world. Even the chattering sparrows and screaming blue jays, a constant backdrop to their adventure, were nowhere to be heard. As they walked further back into this alien environment, Robbie and Ann were struck by an overwhelming dreamy lethargy, as if time itself had slowed down. The vegetation surrounding them was strikingly different from anything they had ever seen. The ferns in particular were enormous, dozens of times larger than the ones that they were accustomed to seeing in the bogs around Flackton. Intrigued by the otherworldly surroundings, Robbie and Ann pressed on until they reached a small rise. From this vantage point, they could see the familiar sight of the baseball diamond in the distance, where their friends were engrossed in the game. The voices from the field, however, sounded strangely tinny and disembodied. Transfixed, the two young friends watched the game until its conclusion, their eyes never leaving the surreal scene before them. As the players began to disperse, Robbie and Ann knew it was time to return to their own world. They retraced their steps, crossing the mysterious stream once more. The moment they stepped back into the familiar side of the stream, they turned to look behind them, only to discover that the dream world had vanished without a trace. As we reflect on Robbie and Ann's intriguing TIMESLIP story, it's fascinating to speculate about the era that they might have briefly visited. The descriptions of the primordial landscape with its giant ferns and unusual vegetation suggests they could have been transported to a time as distant as the Carboniferous period, around 300 million years ago. The Earth's environment during this era was drastically different, with high oxygen levels enabling plants to grow to extraordinary sizes. However, the distant baseball game seemed to indicate a blending across these vast scales of time.